Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 32 of Contemplating Life. This week we conclude a series of episodes that began way back in episode 15, as I recounted my story of a journey through a special education school from kindergarten through high school, and then attending a regular neighborhood high school part-time for my sophomore through senior years. I always thought it strange that at the end of your education, the ceremony is called Commencement, which means beginning. It's the end of one phase of your life, but the beginning of the rest of your life. But before you move on, you have to leave the past behind. You have to say goodbye to people you may never see again. It's an emotional experience, whether or not your educational years were good or bad. Last week we left off with the senior prom, and my first kiss with a cute freshman girl named Cheryl Fayette. After the prom, I wrote her a very flattering love letter, telling her how she was the prettiest girl there, and how proud I was that she was my date. She wrote me a really nice letter back, and we had some nice conversations when we could get together in school. Sometime during the following week, Roberts High School held its annual picnic. In previous years, we'd just gone out to the parking lot, or a small wooded area between our school and Tech High School. They would set up some folding tables, and Mr. Price would grill some hamburgers and hot dogs. But this year, we loaded up on a bus and went to a city park. I think we went to Garfield Park, but I'm not sure. We unloaded in a paved parking lot, and then went down a small hill to a nice grassy area. A guy named Richard got his wheelchair caught in a hole, and it tipped over, but he was okay. Later on in the paved area, we had a wheelchair tug-of-war. They tied a rope to the back of my wheelchair and tied the other end to Wayman's wheelchair. Having taken a physics class, I knew things about center of gravity, leverage, moment of inertia, etc. So I had them tie the rope on my chair down low. I didn't notice that they tied the rope on Wayman's wheelchair on the back, about waist high. A bunch of people got in the middle of the rope on both sides, and we started pulling. Everyone was cheering and yelling as my end was winning. I didn't hear that some of the people were yelling, "Stop! Stop!" Wayman's wheelchair tipped over backwards, and I was dragging him. He was pretty peeved at me because I didn't stop, but I told him I couldn't hear that for all the yelling. He was okay. Fortunately, no one was hurt. It was all in good fun. After we had our hot dogs and/or burgers, Cheryl and I took off on our own to stroll around the park, holding hands. Unfortunately, she had a serious need to find a restroom, and there wasn't anything accessible in the park, so she was a bit uncomfortable the whole time. Still, it was romantic to wander off, strolling through a nice park on a sunny spring day. Cheryl and I promised to stay in touch after I graduated. We talked on the phone a couple of times in the summer, but never did get together for another date. I never ran into her or spoke to her again for many years. The reason I never followed up or continued to see her, even though we might have had some fun together, was the same reason I had given up on my relationship with Rosie. I'm pretty sure that Cheryl was capable of self-care and could transfer in and out of her wheelchair, but she was not capable of doing anything for me physically. The fact that she was 3 years younger than me worried me. In some respects, I might take advantage of her naivety. When I was her age, I had not fully considered the difficulty of a relationship with another disabled person compared to what would be possible with an able person. What if she started having serious feelings for me? When giving up on my relationship with Rosie, I said that if we ever did fall in love and it wouldn't work, it would be like hitting a brick wall. The same thing could happen with Cheryl, and what if she wasn't prepared for that? So I could have had a lot of fun with a very attractive girl in a wheelchair, but it wasn't going to go anywhere, and I just couldn't pursue it. I've never been on a date with another disabled girl since then. About 10 or 15 years later, I was at a rock concert at Market Square Arena. I think it was Rush doing their 2112 album tour. In those days, there was not a specialized wheelchair section in that venue. You would sit in the aisle on the 6th level in front of one of the entrances into the arena, where the aisle was wide enough that people could get by without tripping over your wheelchair. I looked one aisle over, and there was an attractive girl in a wheelchair. I thought about going over to her and saying hi, but I didn't. When the concert broke up, I passed her in the outer concourse. I made eye contact and kind of smiled, but I didn't have the nerve to speak to her. About halfway home, I got to thinking there was something familiar about her. Duh. You idiot, Chris. The reason she seemed familiar, she was my date for the senior prom. It was Cheryl. What a jerk I am. In my defense, she was wearing glasses. Now I know how Clark Kent gets away with it. Over the years, I tried doing Google searches or Facebook searches for her to no avail. Then I thought I might have found her one time at the Indianapolis Children's Museum. Years ago, the Children's Museum had a theater called the iWorks Cinedome that showed 1570 format documentaries, similar to IMAX. They had a little 7-minute feature that they showed before many of the films called Imagine Indiana. I included a YouTube link in the description. It features a time-lapse shot of the museum lobby. You can see a girl in a wheelchair working at an information booth in the lower right portion of the screen. Although the image looks tiny in a blurry, low-resolution YouTube version I found, when you saw it on an IMAX-sized screen, it was much clearer. The girl strongly resembled Cheryl. She had long black hair, and she had her feet propped up in her wheelchair, just like Cheryl used to do. I would watch that film and wonder if it was her. Then one day I was at the museum, and I saw the girl from the IMAX film. It wasn't Cheryl. Yes, I'm sure it wasn't her. I wasn't going to make that mistake twice. The girl at the museum was much younger than Cheryl, maybe in her 20s. Cheryl would have been 40 by then. I think it was in 2018 or so that I finally found Cheryl on Facebook, but she had not posted anything since 2013. There was a photo of her and a boyfriend named Steve, not much else. I looked at Steve's profile, and there were messages from 2013 saying she was ill. I found an obituary for her dated August 3rd, 2013. I'd missed her by just a few years. I would have liked to catch up with her, reminisce about old times, explain why I quit calling her, and apologize for not recognizing her at the concert, assuming she recognized me. I seem to recall there was some sort of graduation ceremony at Roberts, but I didn't participate. I was probably there, though. I attended my graduation ceremony at Northwest because that's what my diploma says. At the end of the year, you typically write messages in your yearbook, wishing people well, saying things perhaps you hadn't said in person, and especially in your senior year, saying goodbye to people. Unfortunately, we didn't have a yearbook at Roberts, and Northwest's yearbook was delayed, so I didn't have it in time for anyone to sign at Roberts or Northwest. They later had a special event at Northwest to distribute the yearbooks and give people an opportunity to sign them. We did sign something at Roberts on the last day. I thought it was a little blue booklet that was the program for the Roberts graduation. But when I dug it up and found it in my memorabilia stash, that wasn't it. That little blue booklet was the program for the senior prom, and people had written messages in it. I also looked at my Northwest yearbook, thinking perhaps I got it in time for the last day at Roberts, but there were no Roberts signatures in the Northwest yearbook. You may recall the story I told when we graduated 8th grade. I wrote on Rosie's class photo cover, "See you next year to try again." And she wrote on mine, "Don't try again, you'll never succeed." So it was with great trepidation that I looked at what Rosie said to me. It said, "You've meant more to me as a friend than you'll ever know. Rosie." The first thing that jumped off the page was the word Rosie. The day I met her, her mother called her Rose Ellen, and so did the teacher, until she made it clear she wanted to be just Rose. I asked her, "Why did you sign it Rosie? You've always been Rose." She said, "I thought perhaps you might think of me fondly when you look back on our relationship as your little Rosie." As you can see, I took her advice, and I have frequently fondly referred to as Rosie, even though I never called her that for our entire relationship. After I got home and reread what she had written, without focusing on the Rosie signature, I realized she was 100% right. I had never realized how much I really meant to her as a friend. And I also discovered that the converse was true. I never realized or appreciated how much she meant to me as a friend. I spent much of my high school lamenting the romance we didn't have, without bothering to stop often enough to cherish what we did have. That tough lesson that I learned from that one sentence was the lesson that shaped my relationship with every woman after that. We will talk more about those relationships in future episodes, and I'll explain more about how those simple truths she shared with me on our last day in school changed my life for the better. As I explained back in episode 20 about all the friends I've lost, Rosie got married shortly before I saw her again at the reunion. And although I spoke to her on the phone after the reunion article came out in Indianapolis Monthly Magazine, I never saw her again in person. She lived to the age of 38 years, 1 month, and 24 days, and died on October 29, 1993. My wingman, Raymond, who went to the prom with me and helped me get that first kiss, only lived to his late 20s, as was typical in those days for someone with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I never saw him or spoke to him again after graduation. About my friend Miguel Rodriguez, the guy who nearly fell out of his wheelchair laughing when I couldn't remember what was on the Valentine I gave Rosie in 8th grade. He got married to a Roberts alum, had a son, and then got divorced. I saw him once or twice after graduation and at the reunion, but I haven't heard from him or seen him in decades. There was a girl named Luann Kincaid who had very severe cerebral palsy. Her mother and my mother were very good friends, and although I never spoke to Luann much because I couldn't understand her speech very well, we met up again on Facebook about 10 years ago. Her mother passed away about the same time as mine did, and her father cared for her, like mine did. But when he could no longer care for her, she ended up in a group home, and then passed away about a year after that. There was Carol Brummett, who lived a few blocks over from me and rode the bus with me for many years. I kept in touch with her as I would bump into her around the neighborhood. She died sometime in her 60s. There was my buddy Mark Heron, who lived around the corner from me, and we used to fly model rockets together. His family moved to Wayne Township so he could go to high school at Ben Davis High School instead of going to Roberts. He later went on to Butler University and graduated with a business degree. He died of pneumonia about 40 years ago. I thought he had died after getting a flu shot, and I refused to get flu shots for many years for that reason. Then I ran into his sister at St. Vincent Hospital one day, where she worked as an administrator. She told me he was already sick when he got the flu shot, and that combination is what sent him downhill. My doctor eventually convinced me that flu shots were a good idea because they were the only preventive medicine that Medicare pays for. So I've gotten one regularly ever since, as well as a pneumonia shot and all of the COVID vaccinations and boosters. Mark's sister, Lee Ray, who turned down my insincere invitation to the prom, is a Facebook friend. She probably doesn't remember that proposal, and as I write this, she hasn't seen last week's episode telling the story. I was Facebook friends with my junior high social studies teacher, Mr. Cole, for several years, until he passed away some time back. I'm currently Facebook friends with a woman named Judy Spain, who was a couple of years older than me and went to Roberts. We never knew each other very well, but she is the only Roberts alum from my days there who's still alive and still in touch. I've met some other people who went to Roberts after me, but I never knew them when they were there. After the reunion, they closed Roberts School. It was used by the school district for a variety of purposes for several years, and it was nearly demolished until preservationists petitioned to keep it as a historical site. Now it's an apartment building called Roberts School Flats. And so that concludes the story of my 13 years at Indianapolis Public Schools, number 97, James E. Roberts School for the Handicapped. Meanwhile, back at Northwest, as I mentioned, there was a problem with the printing of our yearbooks. They weren't going to be ready by the last day of school. Seniors get out about a week early. They arranged for a special gathering one afternoon to distribute yearbooks in the school cafeteria. Everyone was rushing around and trying to find friends so they could sign each other's yearbooks. I just dug out my old senior yearbook. There were only about 6 signatures, and the only name I recognized was my science mentor, Mr. Irwin. Graduation at Northwest was a huge affair. Normally it's held outside in the football stadium, with the graduates on the field and the parents and family in the grandstand. But it had rained a lot, and the football field was a mess. I don't know if they were worried about my wheelchair out there or if it would just been too muddy for anybody. I don't know if it was raining the evening of commencement, but the bottom line is they moved the ceremony indoors to the gymnasium. The students sat on a basketball court with the audience in the stands. I think attendance was limited to just a few people per student. I was looking forward to it as a joyous occasion, but it was quite scary for me. I had some sort of a summer cold, and I was running a fever of 102 degrees during the ceremony. It was also very hot in the cap and gown in the gymnasium with a couple of thousand people crammed in there. You may recall that one of my best friends at Roberts, Terry Johnson, died of pneumonia just a few months after he graduated high school. I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end for me as well. For him, graduation meant death. Might be for me, too. But it was just the fever talking. I recovered a day or so later and didn't have any serious health problems for many years. In preparing for the podcast, I went looking through a family photo album and found a photo of me in my green cap and gown. You can see it in the YouTube version. Northwest colors were green and silver, and I've been wearing a lot of green clothes for the past 3 years. After graduation, I don't think I wore anything green for several years unless I absolutely had to. I was sick of green and white, or green and silver. I found another photo of me in my cap and gown with my mom and dad and my sisters, Carol and Karen. We all looked really young. I found one more photo of me with 4 other Northwest students that was taken in the hallway outside the gymnasium. I have no idea who these people were. I currently belong to a Facebook group called I Grew Up in Eagledale, which is the neighborhood just east of the school where I live. I posted the photo there to see if anyone recognized themselves or other people. A guy named Rick Harris said that it was him, a guy named Jerry Moore, a guy named Larry Baldwin, and Larry's girlfriend, Karen Kimsey. From the responses I got, apparently Ms. Kimsey was very popular, and many people asked the group if anyone knew where she was. Everyone had lost touch with her years ago. I'm still highly embarrassed. I don't recall any of them. I don't recall any of the names that signed my yearbook. I think possibly the people in the photo just happened to be standing around near me when my parents took the picture, so they posed with me. Or maybe I really did know them, and I just don't remember them. The first weekend of August this year, my senior class had their 50th reunion. I didn't attend because most of the people I recall from my days there were either ahead of me, like Dennis, or a couple behind me. Some of them belonged to my church. I stayed in touch with them there. But I didn't want to go to the reunion and not know anybody. I've seen photos and videos of the reunion posted on Facebook. It looked like they had a good crowd, maybe 75 people or more showed up. I didn't recognize any of them, but then again, it's been 50 years, so nobody looks like they did. Except for the people my age who lived on my street, and a couple of people from church, and my buddy Dennis Adams, I never kept in touch with anyone else who went to Northwest. Dennis is the only lasting friendship that came from that experience. Still, my experiences at Northwest were almost uniformly uplifting in my life. It would have been much more difficult for me to endure the depression I felt at Roberts had I not had the positive experiences at Northwest. The sacrifices my mother made to make that possible did not go to waste, even if I was a bit of a lazy student at times. She allowed me to have the most normal high school experience I was capable of having under the circumstances. For a disabled person, that's huge. I was blessed by wonderful teachers from both schools, including but not limited to Stan Irwin, Ron Cole, Clara Rose Holmes, Irene McBurney, Betty Atkins, kindergarten teacher Mrs. Martin, substitute writing teacher Mrs. Allen, and Beatrice Rogers, who probably had a sore foot for many years after I ran over it with my wheelchair. My grade school and junior high experiences at Roberts were also a blessing. The lessons learned, both academic and life lessons, served me well. It was only the substandard high school program that was problematic. The good and bad experiences at both schools shaped me in countless ways that have served me well in the 50 years since I graduated. All I can say is that I was truly blessed. That concludes my series of episodes that started way back in episode 15, telling the story of my 13 years at Roberts and Northwest. As I mentioned previously, I'm going to take a couple of weeks off to rest, recuperate, and recharge my brain. I might go back and tell more of my faith journey. I might pick up my life story describing my college days. Or I might do some political rants. We'll just have to see. Let me remind you that all 32 episodes are available on YouTube, the website contemplatinglife.com, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and other formats. If you join somewhere in the middle, I invite you to go back and catch up on back episodes. If you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 per month. You'll get early access to the podcast and any other benefits I might come up with down the road. Although I have some financial struggles, I'm not really in this for the money. Still, every little bit helps. Many thanks to my Patreon supporters. Your support pays for the writing seminar I attend. But mostly I appreciate it because it shows how much you care and appreciate what I'm doing. Your support means more to me than words can possibly express. Even if you cannot provide financial support, please post links and share this podcast on social media so I can grow my audience. If you have any comments, questions, or other feedback, please feel free to comment on any of the platforms where you find this podcast. I'll see you sometime soon, in a few weeks, as we continue contemplating a life. Until then, fly safe, everyone.